Hi everybody, it's Chris Kandaya and welcome to FAQ, Faith and Quarantine. This has been a daily series looking at some of the challenges to leadership and life under lockdown and finding resources in the Bible to help us find a good way through. I've been wrestling with some big ideas about leadership, not because I think I'm a great leader, but I'm a leader that definitely needs some great ideas. And so we've been looking at the life of Saul and Samuel, and now we're coming to land a little bit at the life of David. And so we're going to dig into that today. But I would love to know where you are, where you're watching. My friend Joe Wick, I say friend, I've been following him every day doing a little workout with my kids. We've been doing Spider-Man lunges and bunny hops and you name it. He has a clever idea that if you want to like something, it's like saying a high five to the world. So feel free to put a like or a share to say you're watching and that you're enjoying this, and maybe share it with other people if you think it's helpful. Leadership, huge challenge right now. How do you lead in a brand new situation where no one really knows what's going to happen in the future? We've never lived through anything like this before. How do you lead into uncharted territory? What does that look like? And we're going to draw inspiration from a leader who was very young, very naive, and in one sense, really challenging. Even his own family struggled to know what to do with him. But there are some lessons here about what leadership needs to look like in a new context, and we're going to draw them from the life of David. We're going to engage with probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. Maybe every child grows up reading about it or thinking about it, whether they're from a Christian family or whether it's just part of our culture. In fact, a book was written about it recently. It's called David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. Well, when you put it like that, it does seem like we need that kind of leadership right now. We have a giant of a problem, don't we? Not just the coronavirus and its terrible impact on the health, but people are beginning to worry about what's going to happen afterwards. What about the kind of economic meltdown that we're seeing? As so many businesses are closing down, you can think about the airline industry, £350 billion worth of investment not taking place. Think about charities in the UK, £3.5 billion worth of charity fundraising that isn't happening. But people talking about large amounts of unemployment once the lockdown lifts. And how will it lift? All these questions. How do we find a way to lead under these difficult circumstances? Well, we're going to zoom in on David's story because I think he had to figure out how to lead under some pretty extreme lockdown moments. So we're going to dig in. We're looking at 1 Samuel chapter 17, which is in the Old Testament. If you want to follow along, that's great. I'll chuck out some verse numbers that might help. But if you just want to listen in, be re-excited, reconnected with just a brilliant, amazing, inspiring story. Chapter 17, verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Socoh in Judah. They pitched their camp at Ephes Dammim between Socoh and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah. There's been a few films referencing that idea, the valley of Elah. When you hear that reference, you know you're going to have a David and Goliath type fight. And they drew up their battle lines to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. Interesting. Don't know what's going on with Samuel, but he keeps referencing people's height. I guess, again, that perception that the taller and bigger you are, the more powerful and a greater leader you can be. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armour of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. And on his legs were bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Now you're getting a picture of this huge guy weighed down with all sorts of armour and armaments, and we're supposed to be in awe and shock about him. How can anyone fight him? This whole idea of champions is a brilliant one, though, isn't it? Imagine that instead of having to fight a war, you just sent some champions to fight it for you. Wouldn't that be a better way of resolving things than hundreds of thousands of deaths? So there is this kind of idea that if the champion wins, then his nation wins, and we don't need to fight in between. I wonder why that was never picked up. Goliath stood and shouted at the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come out to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your servants. If I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now, part of me was thinking, how come Saul didn't just go out and fight? Well, interestingly, the king of Philistia didn't go and fight either. He sent a champion, a warrior. So they're supposed to search their ranks and find the greatest warrior amongst them. But because of the sheer scale of Goliath, no one was willing to go. And then verse 12. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. We know this. We're just being reminded. It's almost like one of those Channel 4 kind of documentaries where after every break they remind you of what's happened before. They don't want you to forget of David's background. He's not from a mighty tribe. The Benjamites weren't kind of a big deal. He is from Bethlehem, which you know is important and will become a watchword as we go through, and was important for the story of Ruth and Naomi. And we know that he is one of 8 sons in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and Saul's time, he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So David isn't seen to be strong enough or important enough to actually go and fight. Maybe he's too young. Maybe it's felt that the father needs him back at the farm, and so he acts as a go-between. You know, there's no mobile phones or telegrams or anything, so this has to be word of mouth. And David is kind of keeping his dad informed about what's going on while looking after the flocks. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Imagine the kind of emotional attrition that goes on. Every day he mocks them, and every day no one comes forward. This is shaming Israel for being too cowardly. And it has an impact, not just on the psyche of the nation, but on their understanding of God. And I wonder if there are some parallels with this feeling of powerlessness that we're feeling in lockdown. You know, we can't really do much. We're staying at home and we're washing our hands and we're praying, but you know, it doesn't seem like we can make an impact. It doesn't seem like anything's happening. There's this growing sense when we've been told lockdown's going to continue that we're powerless. And how do we keep up our sense of trust in God and hope for the future when there's nothing we can do? I wonder if that kind of emotional attrition was really taking its toll on Israel. Verse 17, now Jesse said to his son David, take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting against the Philistines. So David is sent with some provisions, bread for his brother. Interestingly, I've lived in countries where when you go into hospital, for example, the hospital staff aren't seen to care about feeding you. It's still your family's responsibility to feed you, even when you're in hospital. And so I wonder whether the army worked in that way. You know, if your family sent boys off to war, and it probably was boys in a patriarchal society, the family still had responsibility for feeding them. Maybe that's why Jesse sent food, and whether he's feeling he needs to butter up or cheese up the commanding forces, maybe that's why he sent the cheeses to the commanding officers. Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking to them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites have been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. So Saul's been trying everything to find someone that will go down, but no one's been willing to go, no matter what tax incentives. I suppose the hand of his daughter in marriage was also a way of saying you'll be included in influence and power. And also great wealth. David asked those standing him, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistines? Anyway, that becomes, he just recited again and again. They repeated to him, verse 27, what they've been saying. This is what will be done for them. But, verse 28, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom do you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. There's some kind of brotherly friction here, some sibling rivalry. Often the youngest in biblical stories are treated differently to the oldest, and sometimes that can lead to jealousy. You remember the story of the prodigal son. The older brother is kind of jealous of the younger brother and the reception that he gets. You get it in the story of Joseph, but there's friction in the family, and no one thinks David is a warrior. His dad doesn't think he's a warrior. That's why he keeps him tending his sheep. His brother thinks he's conceited and he has got a broken heart that's always kind of conceited and looking out for itself. He is dismissed by everyone. And later we're going to see he's dismissed by Goliath. And this is interesting, isn't it? That the eventual leader here is not recognized by those in his closest family. He's been dismissed as useless. Those that should have spotted leadership in him aren't seeing it. And remember, this is after Samuel has anointed David to be the next king of Israel. It's almost like they've forgotten this thing that has been promised to him, even when David was just a young boy. And there's a sense here of the importance of memory, remembering the promises that God have given us. And David seems to have this continual confidence in God, despite everyone else writing him off and dismissing him. David maybe remembers the anointed that he got from Samuel. Or somehow David, as is described earlier, is a man after God's own heart, even though no one else recognizes him and no one else encourages him. Now what have I done, said David. Can't I even speak? Sounds like a little fight between brothers. Maybe if you're in lockdown with kids, you hear these kind of discussions every day. Can't I even speak? He then turned away and asked someone else and brought up the same matter. And the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. Okay, so someone hears that at least someone is willing to go forward and fight Goliath. And as soon as King Saul hears that, off he goes, he pulls him in. And Saul replied, you are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are little more than a boy, and he's been a warrior from his youth. Okay, so once Saul actually looks at him and sees how scrawny and small he is, he doesn't have confidence in him either. This is despite Saul hopefully remembering David from all the time he's been playing the harp to kind of exercise the evil spirit that he's coping with. But no one seems to remember David. He seems to have a very forgettable face, and no one remembers the anointing that he's been given. Now here's a great speech. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. Interesting. I'm a big Malcolm Gladwell fan. I enjoy his books. I think Blink was the first I read, The Long Tail the next. He's an amazing writer, and he reinterprets this story of David and Goliath as being two different types of warfare. That David basically was some form of early artilleryman. He fires a projectile weapon, as we're going to see, at a foot soldier, an infantryman. And that was the kind of miscalculation. But David's confidence isn't in his own ability. Even though he says that he's killed, bears and lions, not with a projectile. He says, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it. In other words, he didn't do this kind of long distance warfare on the bear and the lion. He was up close and personal. But it's not that David's saying, I'm so powerful I can rip a bear apart. That's why I can trust. He says, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. That's the difference. David is absolutely confident in God. The God who has rescued his people throughout history. He knows all about the Exodus. He knows all about the Judges and Samuel and all the ways that God has rescued his people when they got in trouble. And he has proved the faithfulness of God in his own life in a small way, in an invisible, out of the way, not on Facebook or Instagram kind of way. And that's given him even more confidence in God. It's not in his different form of warfare that he's confident. It's in God. And that's, I think, something that we need as leaders looking forward. We can't predict the future. We don't know how things are going to work out. My confidence is not in my ability to put on a Zoom call or a Facebook Live event or whether we get more views for our church services online or not. My confidence has got to be in God's ability to sort out the future. That ultimately technology and our instruments are not the ultimate confidence for us. It's in God's ability to deliver. And I think that's something I need to grasp a hold of. That's hard for me because I like technology, but my ultimate confidence is in God, not in my ability and not in my ability to use technology. Saul said to David, "Go and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armour on him and bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these because I'm not used to them." So he shook them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Lots is made of this about David waging war in his way and not in Saul's way, that he needs to be fast and agile and not weighed down. There is something in that, because we are told a lot about Goliath's weighty armour and how big his spear was. And we are given a picture of the kind of agile young shepherd boy skipping down the valley and running at Goliath. So there does seem to be something here. And some people might make an allegory here between, we need a new way, a new strategy, not just depending on the old ways. And there is some of that. But I don't think that's the central thesis in this story of David's leadership. It isn't ultimately about his agility or his willingness to, throw off the old way of doing things and do things in a new way. I think it is still ultimately his confidence in God. All right, here we go. And here's another great speech. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." Now, there's a theory, and Malcolm Gladwell talks about it, that, surely it only says that David had one stick as he came down the valley of Elah. And so why does Goliath say that he was coming at him with sticks, and why does he ask him to come here? So one theory says that Goliath can't actually see very well. That's why he wants him to come closer and be involved in one-on-one combat. Not sure. Come at me with sticks. It could just be a turn of phrase that says, am I nothing? You'd fend off a dog with a stick, wouldn't you? You wouldn't kind of get out some heavy guns or artillery to do it. You just use a stick because it's worth nothing. So he sees this as a great shame or an insult to him, because like his brothers and like Saul and maybe even like his dad, Goliath has written off David because all he sees is a young boy. He doesn't see in whose name David comes. And so you get another great speech here. David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Interesting. It didn't say, "You come against me with sword, but I've got a nifty little weapon called a sling. You come against me with kind of infantryman weapons. I come against you with artillery." The whole of David's speech is about confidence in God and God's ability to deliver. That's different, isn't it? That's his whole outlook is different. Goliath was so confident in his own abilities and his own strength. David is so confident in God and his ability to rescue. And you might hear this as a bit of kind of teasing, just big speech that people use, maybe like in a cricket match or a basketball game, putting down the other person. But this is theologically loaded. David is absolutely confident that it is not his own ability that's going to save. It's God that's able to do it. The name of God is being shamed by this Philistine, and therefore David confidently comes towards him. And I want that to be true of my leadership, that ultimately it's not ability, speaking ability or technical ability or strategic ability. It's actually dependency on God that's going to see us through. And we're going to come up with fresh ways of honouring and serving God because we trust in him, not in us. And there is a double overlay here, because David doesn't just kneel down and pray and then God blasts Goliath. David is absolutely confident in God, and yet he does his best. He uses his practical skills that he has been given. So it's not that we should give up on technical thinking, on using technology well, on strategy, on great ideas, on the things that God's been schooling us in, and our own experience has given us opportunities to develop. It's both and, isn't it? David uses his skills as a shepherd, but he trusts that it's God that's able to make them effective. And so for those of us that are trying to lead now, studying hard, talking with others, strategizing, all of that is useful if it's offered in humility and asking God to do his will. The battle belongs to God, even though I need to do some fighting, I guess is how David would put it. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. Again, Malcolm Gladwell talks about the speed of spinning the sling and that smooth stone firing and hitting Goliath like a bullet. Someone said it could be up to 35 meters per second, so it could get embedded in his forehead. What a great shot. And again, not necessarily a kind of supernaturally guided missile, although David will attribute glory to God for it. There are slingshots like David that are used in battles in other contexts. So this is not completely out of the question, although again, David has great humility. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword. He didn't even bother taking a sword with him, and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a great shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sharon road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered the camp. As soon as David returned, verse 57, from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." It's an amazing story. David wins because he trusts God. He uses his own skills and abilities that he's developed over time, but he wins because he trusts God. And David is showing himself to be the Lord's anointed. And look, sometimes when we read this story, we say, oh, we can all be like David if we just trust God and God can use us. There is an element in which Bible stories act like that. That's why the book of Hebrews in chapter 11 picks up heroes of the faith in the Old Testament and says that if we have faith, we can follow in their footsteps. There is a kind of exemplar going on here. But one way that I found, another way I guess I found helpful to read this story was given to me by a guy called Graham Goldsworthy in his book Gospel and Kingdom. And he said, look, we all like to think of ourselves as David fighting Goliath if we're strong enough. But actually we're closer to being like the rest of the Israelite army along the valley cliff edge, looking down. We're helpless because the enemy is so strong we can't possibly fight. And so God anoints a leader to go and fight the enemy on our behalf, and he wins that battle. Now, if you've been following this series, you know that the anointed one, that's what happened to David when he was made king in secret by Samuel. He's anointed with oil. The word anointed one is the same as the word Messiah. And so in some ways, David is a foretaste of the ultimate Messiah, Jesus, who will come and fight an impossible battle on our behalf. He will be our champion who fights sin and death and the devil when he dies on the cross, and he wins a victory that we could never win for ourselves. And we trust in him and we get all the glory and spoils that Jesus won for us on the cross. We get forgiveness, reconciliation with God, eternal life. We get all that not because of our ability, but because of Jesus's. That's incredible. That is definitely another framing of how you're supposed to understand this story. And so we put our trust in a Jesus who's the only one who can win the battles that we can never fight for ourselves. And that is an important element. But I do think we are supposed to learn something about the nature of faithful leadership under pressure, in crisis, under lockdown, from the story of David. So it can be a both and here. That if we, like David, put our confidence in God's ability, not our own, we hone our skills, of course, and we offer them humbly to God, then I think we can be really effective in God's service. But ultimately, we need Jesus to come and save us from the battle that we cannot fight for ourselves. Hope that helps. Slightly longer one. It's an amazing story. So much riches in there. I'd love to hear what you make of this story and how it might inspire your leadership. Please like and share and let me know any questions you've got about how we should go forward. We've finished a little series looking at leadership in lockdown. We end with a kind of massive victory for David. Where should we go next? Let me know and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks. Bye.